Okay, greetings and solidarity. Very glad to be here. Thank you. It's certainly appropriate, if largely unappealing, to be talking about police in the context of May Day, International Workers' Day, because in many ways the struggles directly related to the development of May Day as International Workers' Day were struggles involving struggles against police, starting with the attack by police of locked out workers at the McCormick harvesting equipment plant, where the cops killed several workers, and then partly in response to that, the march that ended up with the battle at Haymarket Square. We understand in Surrey the struggles against policing to be, in many ways, an everyday, ongoing part of our lived reality. We are subjected to policing that is carried out by the forces in the framework of what is nothing less than a social war, a class war. We're subjected on a nightly basis to flyovers by helicopters, projecting searchlights into our backyards, into our homes. We're subjected to runs of Bearcat, armored personnel vehicles up and down King George. More recently, the police have been experimenting, and this is one that is not getting a whole lot of attention, certainly in the media. We're subjected to experiments with drones in Surrey. They've been using drones to once again surveil us, surveil our neighborhoods, surveil our homes, to surveil our day-to-day activities. More famously has been the ratcheting up of police force and the famous 100 officers that the local government has been clamoring for, which have been delivered by the feds. This represents an incredible social expenditure. This is a social theft. They're taking money from things that we need in our communities, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's community resources, and they're putting it into policing. This does nothing to make us safer. This isn't about safety and protection. This is largely about fear, making us fearful so that portions of us will become dependent on the state, will look to the state for support and for defense. It's also about division. It's also about dividing our communities. And this gets carried out in the specifics of policing as well, right? In terms of communities that are targeted for over-policing, in terms of things that are happening regularly over on King George, where poor people who have been living in some of the only remaining lower-cost housing in Surrey, in trailer parks on King George, are being subjected to regular attacks by cops in their neighborhoods, harassment, and the use of bylaw officers finally to break up those communities. And we've seen several of the trailer parks have been dismantled and then immediately converted, of course, into condo and townhouse developments, very high cost.
And those folks, there was 30 folks made homeless just a few weeks ago, and of those, only 7 found temporary shelter, 3 have apartments, and most of them are on the street or looking for emergency shelter space.
And they're doing this through the language of criminalization, trying to make us believe that our fellow members of the working class are criminals because they're trying to survive, because they might be engaged in activities like low-level drug trade or sex work, which they need in order to survive. Many of them aren't involved in that. They simply have a source of lower-cost housing. But it creates a panic, it creates a fear that allows them to go in and divide us amongst ourselves. We've also heard more recently about roughly $23 million coming in the form of new technology, new toys to ratchet up this sort of policing in our neighborhoods. In addition, just over the last couple of weeks, the police have been granted 24-hour live access to the surveillance cameras, the traffic light cameras in the city. Now, once again, that's not about any of the things that they might say it's about in terms of gangs or going after gangsters or that kind of thing. Another sort of technique they use to divide us. Those traffic cameras, that's about surveilling us. And we need to be clear about that. That's not going after gangsters. Now, these sorts of approaches have also resulted in extreme violence against our communities. And we can think about, just over the last year, our children who have been killed by the cops in Surrey. Hudson Brooks, a young man who was killed outside of an RCMP detachment where he apparently went because he was seeking help. Thought that someone was chasing him. He went to the RCMP for help, and they killed him. And then they constructed a story that there was some exchange of gunfire, and it turned out that the only weapon that was fired came from the cops themselves. It seems that the cop who went out initially either shot themselves or was shot by another cop. And they tried to pin it on this kid. That family is still trying to figure out what happened to the child. You can also think of Navarone Woods, who was killed, who may have been experiencing some sort of personal distress and was killed by police in Surrey. Yeah, we need to, as one thing, stand in solidarity with these families in their efforts to confront the police who are killing their children and our children, and to stand with them in their efforts to get answers to what's happening and what is happening in our communities. These are examples of extreme state violence. We can also think about other examples of, and we know the way in which anti-terror panics have been used to target resistance groups, people's liberation groups. We can think about, in a very specific context, the police setup of two young, poor people living in Surrey, John Nuttall and Amanda Carodi, who were targeted by the RCMP largely because they were poor, because they were struggling. And the RCMP set up a plot to blow up the provincial legislature. And the cops provided the idea for the plan. They provided all of the equipment to make a pressure cooker bomb, except for anything that would allow it to actually use as a bomb. So it was basically a pressure cooker. They took these kids out who were poor, were struggling. They gave them expensive meals. They showered a lot of attention on them. They provided someone who seemed to care about them and to care about their lives. And over time, they encouraged them, hey, let's build this thing. Let's do it. You really should do it. You know, this will be good for you. You want us to keep giving you attention, and you like the attention and all that. They had many reservations about it. In the end, the cops helped them to place a broken pressure cooker at the legislature grounds, and then immediately arrested them in what was purely a setup. Once again, designed at division and fear and dependence on the authorities, as well as providing the cops an opportunity to ask for even more money and resources in their anti-terror efforts. Now, it's clear in this case, the only terrorists with a plan were the RCMP themselves. They were the terrorists. They're the terrorists that we need to confront in our communities. I also want to speak about the other efforts that the police are deploying in our neighborhoods, and this is what Ayanna's touched on. There has been a real ratcheting up of efforts to place police into our public schools, into our institutions of learning, to target kids in this climate that they've created around fear and panic for recruitment. So we see at the institution that I teach at Kwantlen University, we see a concerted effort by all levels of police to get instructors, even on a sessional basis, but to have instructors in departments, in the social sciences, for example, where they're not teaching an understanding of the system, they're not teaching an understanding of the nature of the state and state practice. They're there solely to recruit. They're there to recruit not only the next generation of officers, but they're also there to recruit communications lines in our communities. They are building a snitch culture amongst our children, and we need to be aware of, recognize, and confront that. What they're also doing is building a layer of youth who, in their view, they hope, will have an allegiance not to their class, not to their community, not to their family, not to their friends, but who will have an allegiance to the state, first and foremost. So we have, for us, one of the priorities that we need to develop is a movement for cops off campus. We need to get the cops out of our classrooms. We need to stop the cops from recruiting our students, our children. And we need to confront them directly as recruiters, not as the instructors that they pretend to be, because they're not. That's not right. Finally, in wrapping up, we oftentimes hear about the militarization of policing. There's a sense that, well, recently the police have become more militarized. That is, they're using Bearcats, they're using helicopters, they have heavy body armor, they have assault weapons when they take to the streets. I just want us to remember that the RCMP, for example, the municipal force in Surrey, is and has always been a military force. That's why it was designed. It hasn't become militarized recently. It has always been a military force. First, and of highest priority, as a settler colonial military force, a force of occupation and expropriation and dispossession of indigenous communities to open up, on the one hand, a market for capital, central Canadian capital at the time, and global capital as well, and also to gain access to the raw materials, the minerals, timber, and so forth in the West. And this is why they were formed, explicitly, and to help provide defense for the railway, which is also crucial in opening up those markets in goods and in materials. They of course, played infamously a role in putting down the uprising of Métis and Indigenous communities in the Northwest Rebellion in 1885. There are other military adventures, and I mean, it's their history, so I'm just going to speak to a couple of sort of highlights, but it's ongoing. It's not occasional, it's not momentary. This is what the RCMP are. This is what our municipal force is. They were active as a force in the Boer War, okay, militarily, a war in which the English imperialists experimented with concentration camps and developed some of the early concentration camps. The RCMP were also active as an invasion force in the so-called Siberian Expeditionary Force of 1918 and 1919, which was leveled against the socialist revolution in Russia. An explicitly imperialist force against revolution. That has continued throughout. We can look at RCMP militarism in the First World War, the Second World War, up through UN adventures more recently. The RCMP have been deployed in Afghanistan as part of the occupation in Afghanistan. The RCMP are, right now, today, involved in Iraq. And in fact, one of the officers who is teaching our kids over at Kwantlen University, an RCMP officer who is also the community outreach officer for Surrey. Bullshit. Received a lot of attention and fanfare for this, having his coffees with the cops, right? Have coffee with the cop at a local cafe. You come in and they'll give you free coffee and you hang out and you chat with the cop. This sort of community building. Again, you find people that can separate off from the community and from the working for a year in Iraq, helping to build imperial force in Iraq. We have got to confront the cops in our neighborhoods, we need the cops off campus, and we need to recognize that the so-called municipal police force in Surrey is nothing less than a military force. It is an imperial military force explicitly, and we need to address it on those terms.